Well, hello there to everybody. We're back on the show here called Literature and Rubs with this here guy named Jared.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
I've been reading these here books by Stephen Graham Jones. I think that man is a Texan. Comes right through in his writing, and we're going to talk about his 3 books, the Indian Lake. I'll just go back to my own voice. We're going to talk about Indian Lake Trilogy. Something different. I swear. These are horror books, okay, people? I mean, every horror book has kind of a theme. There's the ghosts themes, the power of the imagination, undead zombies, curses, there's possessed. And what makes these books a little different is the haunted town, the haunted lake, the Indian Lake in Idaho. And there are these rich people that are moving into town that are building up all this property across the lake. It's something, there's of a divide between the people who live there and the people who are paying money to come live there. If you lived in any kind of a mountain town, you would know exactly what this is all about. There's campgrounds and cabins and places where people would hike, and there's cliffs where people would jump off into the lake. And there's this whole history that the lake actually wasn't formerly a lake. It was actually flooded in, which is something that doesn't often get talked about, but it is a practice that actually occurs in America. Historically, people were making towns in areas and trying to establish themselves. There were at times when our federal government or state government would come in and build a dam and flood an entire area, creating energy, power, water resources, and things like that. Naturally, they did get that, but people's lives were ruined in the name of getting those things. That's kind of the angle that I believe Stephen Graham Jones is going for. That's part of the intrigue of these books, is kind of learning about the history and what happened. Now, I may not get into all these books 1, 2, and 3 and rate them together in that way. I've been looking at this trilogy as it all reads as one book, kind of like Wayward Pines, but they do separate themselves. There's a 4-year gap between each book, but the first book brings you right into this town. It has this real kind of 80s, 90s horror vibe, you know, the Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Scream. Like, if you're a big fan of 80s and 90s slasher movies, this book really leans into things like that. I would say Stephen Graham Jones has put a lot of work into making all these movie references from all kinds of slasher movies from the 70s on up until today, 2024, 2025. He's very fluent in this movie lore, this 80s horror culture, slasher culture, and he's built this character, Jennifer Daniels, also known as Jade, or JD, as the horror chick. She's kind of an anti-hero in a lot of ways. And from the first sentence in that first book, it just, whoa, gets you about where her mental state and emotional state is. So you have a real broken character that in each book is trying to do something better for themselves, but they keep getting dragged back down into this stuff that just makes them kind of be the worst part of themselves.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
And that's Jade Daniels, somebody who's got a good heart but is misunderstood and seems to be the only one that really understands how all this stuff works, because she is a slasher movie girl.
Because you know your shit.
It goes through all these rules that apparently go along with slasher movie lore, and I think that the whole series follows through all that, and then the story kind of leans into that in its own way. Book 1, what's going on in the town? What's this big mystery? People are dying. And there's some really good tense moments in there. The characters tend to go off on these tangents, and I was like, okay, this is just establishing some character, and this character was pretty strong. Jade Daniels was very, very on the page. She was very much the focus of all of these stories. And she comes across some friends, and one of them in particular becomes this final girl, and their relationship becomes the crux of all 3 books. They are juxtaposed in not just the way their life is. One is from across the tracks, one lives in that rich place. One is loved by everybody, one is hated by everybody. So a lot of the side characters didn't really have a whole lot. They were there in a lot of ways just to die. They were like red shirts from the Star Trek movie or something like that. The first book is goes through this mystery and you're really kind of trying to figure out, at least for me, is it something that is creepy from the Indian Lake? Is it a ghost? Is it a curse? Or is it an actual murder? And I think that Stephen Graham Jones toys with all that, and so we're never really sure until like the very end of the book. And at that point, there was so much going on, like just slasher gore heaven for real. And I don't think I'm saying too much. I mean, I'm already talking about horror books and slasher books here, so it's not like, oh, nobody dies in these books, guys. Just kidding. But the end of the first book just kind of took me for a loop, and I think in the end I gave that book like a 3.5 out of 5 robes. My Heart is a Chainsaw. I really love that title, and it really fits well. It's apt for the main character. However, I didn't understand. Sometimes the protagonist didn't have any control over some of these horrific events, and that's kind of what I thought some of the point of having this protagonist in the first place was for. And so the end of the first book kind of just leaves you hanging like, what the hell? And so the second one, Don't Fear the Reaper, 4 years later, and you kind of get to some of that story, like, okay, this is what happened at the end of book 1, which was jolting, just the way it ended. Second one is about the two main characters, Jade and her friend,
You forgot me again!
Letha. So Jade and Letha are getting back together. There's a new threat that has come to town, and for some reason this town is on this cycle of the worst crap happening, but it presents different environmental challenges. Again, it was in a mountain town, and there's all kinds of like interactions, not just with people who are the antagonists to our protagonists, but also the environment, the ecology around that area, how everything that was affected by the lake. He pays kind of a certain amount of attention to all this stuff and builds sort of this lore around the town, which is kind of the fun part. You get really close to a certain amount of characters and you've discovered their stories of love and loss. But this lake seems central to a lot of things that are unrequited. As you can imagine, there might be some bones underneath the water there.
Revenge is a dish that is best served cold.
Once again, the town is experiencing this death and murder and all this stuff, and each one, it's like a theme, but it shows up in different ways, and I'm not going to talk about that. And again, it's a horror book, so you got to expect some kind of crazy stuff like that happening. And the whole way, Stephen Graham is given some real nice tense moments, but then sometimes he just pulls off and decides to go down this tangent about, oh, it reminded me of this other time when I was doing it, or he'll talk about a movie, about how the movie relates to it. He relies on these rules of slasher movies to determine what will happen next. And me as a reader, I didn't really attach to that because I'm not super familiar with slasher movies, first of all. Second of all, I felt like that was kind of a limiting quality to the narrative, when maybe going outside of the rules would surprise your main characters a little bit more.
Surprise, bitch!
Sometimes it would lead you there just right. I didn't think it happened well in the first book. In the second book, Stephen got it right, I think. And I kind of was, okay, this makes sense, this ending, but I still wondered why. Why is all this happening? Why every 4 years or whatever? So book 2 ends and another 4 years goes by, but I think I gave book 2 like a 3.8 out of 5. It was better than book 1, but Fear the Raper was a little better told. Things started to make a little more sense because the first book already established that we're following slasher movie rules, and we're not going to explain about really why, but oh my gosh, this is horrible. The final book, The Angel of Indian Lake, is actually my favorite of the 3. I thought that each of the books got better as it went, and I gave that one a 4.2 out of 5 robes because the story was a lot more linear. The story is told almost in the style of a memoir. The thoughts of Jade telling the events would offer up thoughts like memories of people that maybe she was trying to explain this story to. It seemed to soften those tangents. There was an increase in tension. There was a little more scariness to the book. And the good part of it is we definitely get all of our answers about a lot of what actually happened in the past to make this town and the lake so cursed. Great. I mean, that's what we were all reading to the end of the trilogy for, right? I just want you to know that it is a satisfying end, and not everything that I wanted happened in the end, but it was an ending. I'm glad that I finished it because I felt like as the books went along, they did get better. I did get the answers that I wanted, and I feel like he wrapped it up pretty well. On the whole, I'd say the trilogy was about 3.75 out of 5, maybe 3.8 out of 5 robes. It was enjoyable. I think that for me, it wasn't quite what I was looking for it seemed a little patchy in terms of that nice rise and fall. He's definitely got a good style. He's very colloquial. He does have that sort of Texas Southern drawl. Some sort of an attitude comes off the pages. And I don't know how else to explain it, but that's the way I'm going to do it.
You know, Bobby, I tell them don't take from me, man. They don't life too short.
I've got another book of his. I was a teenage slasher or something like that. I got an autographed copy of that. I thought it was actually a book 4 or a prequel to this, but it's down that vein, that high school girl slasher movie, 80s, 90s, I don't know. That's the only other Stephen Graham I have planned to read. I know there's something about the Buffalo book. Stephen Graham is one of those that you either really like him or you really don't, and I'm leaning kind of in the middle. I'm not sure if I like him or not, because I think I want to read some other stuff just to be sure of how I feel about him. He's not mid in any ways, unique in his style, but I'm curious to see what else he's got in him outside of talking about, you know, cursed towns and cursed lakes and possibly cursed people, which is fine. I mean, it's horror stuff, but it has its own style. It's kind of dry, kind of gritty. If you like that kind of stuff, then go get some Stephen Graham Jones. Guy's not too bad at all. I can see why he's a popular author. And he's fairly prolific. He puts out a lot of books almost on a yearly basis. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about this, if you've read it at all, or have dipped your toes into Stephen Graham Jones's storytelling at all, but I'd be curious to see if there's something that maybe stands out to you, or if you've read this trilogy as well. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Anything like that. I always love to check out new authors or new stories. Thanks, guys, and remember, keep reading.